Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm really appreciating the comments and subscriptions, so please like and subscribe if you like my content. I will push on. This subject will be a little bit heavier again, but I'm going to try and alternate it so the next one's a bit lighter, more sort of easygoing. This is quite an interesting concept to me at least, so I think you might enjoy it. I will focus on more arts, culture, philosophy, things like that. But for now, this one is about 5th generational warfare and how it affects you. One of the things I've noticed is that bikers tend to be very interesting thinkers, so I'm gradually seem to be orientating my channel more towards that. I do hope you enjoy it. I love the comments, I love chatting to people. So let's dive in. Following on from my video on persuasion and manipulation, which I suggest you watch, as it's a good introduction to this, I want to talk about a new kind of warfare, why it's important, and why you don't realise it's going on and it is used against you every single day. In this modern world, it's very unlikely that Western countries will ever again engage in large direct battles, much in the style of World War II. The price is too high, the price in lives is too high, the squandering of resources is too great. This is why when you see the hysteria in the media that we're on the brink of World War III, it's just clickbait. It's by people who don't understand where modern warfare actually is and how it operates. Instead, nowadays we use a term called 5th generational warfare, which is a combination of other more subtle forms of battle, and it's often much more successful and uses way less resources. It heavily involves the civilian population, so it's important that you're aware of it. The term was first used in 2003 by Robert Steele. So a brief overview on the history of warfare. First generational warfare was essentially land battles, people stabbing each other in fields, quite low tech, often a numbers game. World War I was the first example of what you would call real second generational warfare. There's other examples, but it crept in over time. Industrialization became a huge factor, large land battles, but the distance grew between the opposing forces. There was heavy use of artillery and machine guns. Any technology was exploited, so it was the first war that seen us using aircraft, tanks. Whenever new technology came up, it would be implemented, but it was the first of a new kind of war. I think that's why the cost was so high, because the people running it were still thinking in old strategic terms. Third generation warfare had primarily a focus on speed, manoeuvrability and the exploitation of technology. A key was to use technology to bypass enemy defences, avoid direct conflict. It led to decentralised and fluid operations. A good example is the Blitzkrieg that the Germans used. It was about speed and confusion rather than just sheer power. Special forces started to appear in World War II. Like David Stirling, for example, very interesting character. Did you know the SAS destroyed more planes than the RAF did? What they would do is they would get in jeeps, race around, strike an airbase with machine guns, destroy as much as they can and escape before the Germans knew what hit them. World War II was a great example of the first effective use of special forces in a large war. Fourth generation warfare represented a shift in the way wars were fought and the nature of conflict. It blurred the lines between combatants, civilian, war, politics. Non-state actors played a prominent role. It involves the use of asymmetric tactics, psychological operations, and a focus on undermining an adversary's political will and social cohesion, rather than solely targeting military capabilities. The Cold War is a good example of this. Any military action was primarily done through proxy wars than full confrontation, because the actual full confrontation at East and West would have been devastating. 4th gen started to have the ingredients of 5th gen, it was just in the early stages. Some people argue we're still in 4th gen to an extent, but the advent and speed at which technology is moving us much more into 5th generational warfare. While he didn't invent 5th gen warfare, the strategist, pilot and theorist John Boyd was instrumental in developing it. I'll do a video on him. I read his book, he's an incredibly influential and interesting character. He had a huge impact on jet fighter planes as well. His book's amazing, so I'll do a full video on him at some point and introduce you to him if you're not familiar. So 5th Gen is characterised by a shift away from traditional military confrontation and focuses more on influencing public perception and behaviour through information and technology. Sun Tzu often talked about the will of the people in relation to a conflict. If the will of the people does not back an action, it's very unlikely that it will succeed. You need to engage in a form of total war, controlling the civilian and the battle space, controlling the perception of how the war is conducted, and controlling public opinion. So a primary focus of 5th Gen is non-kinetic warfare. It utilises tools like social media manipulation, bots, AI, disinformation campaigns, cyber warfare to achieve strategic objectives. Its key is to use as little military action as possible. In terms of any actual military action that may be observed, it's usually small, highly accurate actions designed to destabilise and cause disruption. The concept of large land armies engaging in battle is long gone. Now it's much more reliant on small teams of special operators, no fixed front line to speak of, moving deep behind enemy lines, using mobility and speed, creating confusion, leveraging technology such as drones, avoiding large entrenched military divisions, sowing mayhem, and actively refusing to engage in open conflict. Utilising what could be perceived as terror attacks is a key element, attacking civilians. You can then control the narrative, blame other groups, and use it to create unease and fear in a population. It works well to avoid casualties on your own side too, as a key thing that will reduce enthusiasm for a war is starting to see coffins returning home. 5th Gen will make full use of any emerging technologies. Any AI, autonomous systems, data analysis. It will use whatever it can to amplify, reach, and impact to spread its message as far as possible and to control narratives. Cyber attacks will be used to disrupt critical infrastructure to cause panic and economic disruption. We've seen a lot of large cyber attacks in recent years. This is like an invisible war going on in the background. I'm often left wondering if there was an attack on a group or nation, you could create absolute havoc by disrupting the power grid, key information sources like Google. Could you imagine the chaos if someone damaged the water and sanitation supply is a good example. Also with 5th Gen you've got the deniability there, so it could be just anonymous hackers or it could be actual state-sponsored warfare. 5th Gen has a decentralised nature. It can be conducted by state and non-state actors, making it difficult to identify the source of attacks and difficult to develop counter strategies. Small teams of highly motivated individuals using technology cause massive damage and they're very hard to track down. As an example, a government will sack its own special forces operators, then it will rehire them as contractors through a third party to perform a specific action. This gives the country deniability if they are captured, and then they can achieve their objectives but take no responsibility for it. Terrorist groups are a very good example, and these are often secretly sponsored by state parties. The real power of 5th Gen warfare is the ability to control the battle space within the human mind, control behaviour, control societal structures, reshape societies based on your information warfare, affect the economic systems of your rival. War isn't just something that happens on the battlefield far from you. It's something waged in your own mind every day using persuasion, propaganda, information, social media. Your rival is always looking for methods to destabilise your country. It can put out disinformation to cause riots, sow social division, anything it can do to undermine a society or culture and retain the deniability that they are even remotely involved. It makes heavy use of disinformation campaigns, spreading false or misleading information through social media, working to manipulate public opinion and sow discord. Both sides will do this on each other's populations in an attempt to undermine consensus and support for a conflict. News media, social media, and other sophisticated methods are used on you every day. In terms of warfare, it's relatively cheap to conduct and very effective compared to other methods. Finding ways to create internal conflict within your rival's population, destabilise them, undermine their society. An interesting recent example during the Pakistan-India conflict was the use of AI imagery to claim planes had been shot down when there hadn't even been an air engagement. The UK seems very destabilised at the moment. I don't know how much of this is due to our perceived enemies or just general incompetence. I tend to lean on general incompetence. In its current form, the UK has internal division and financial issues. Have you read the recent articles about how young people have no interest in fighting for the country? That's a great way of watching the social cohesion broken down. People don't feel they are a part of a greater tribe, so it'd be next to impossible to raise a large army to fight against anyone. The government is always fighting to control the narrative, which is very difficult in this information age. The use of disinformation is critical, and you can watch governments almost panic trying to deal with it every day. Did you know the UK has an actual department focused on this? It was used extensively during the COVID crisis to control public opinion. Social engineering. Using psychological manipulation and deception to exploit human vulnerabilities and influence decision making. Manipulating narratives, influencing public opinion, rather than any sort of direct physical combat. The key is to build fear and confusion in your enemy without firing a single shot. Cutting off the oil and gas supply to Europe was a good example from Russia. It meant it could affect the economy, it could interrupt supplies of essential energy. A civilization runs on energy. So this is an excellent example of 5th gen warfare. You damage a couple of pipes, you cause mayhem in a country, you annoy everyone by putting the price of everything up. The country has to panic and resource resources from elsewhere. Another key element of this is, if you've ever read any history of the CIA, you'll know financial warfare is used often. You can devalue currencies, you can crash people's stock markets, especially if you're a very wealthy nation like the United States. You can leverage that sort of financial power to cause mayhem for other countries. There's absolutely no reason they couldn't just crush the economy of someone that they didn't like, destroy them from the inside out, and then you don't have to fire a single shot. Erosion of trust is a key goal within 5th gen. Disinformation and propaganda erodes trusts in institutions and societies. It breaks social cohesion. You can use media to spread ideas, undermining establishments. Maybe you can fund and build underground political movements or sway public opinion en masse. There's a multitude of relatively easy and cheap techniques. Smear tactics are often used against individual groups to try and tie them to negative things. A particular example is if you have a rising political opponent within your society, you can hit them with a smear of accusations. You'll have seen this often. The burden of proof often falls on them, and once it's in the media sphere, it's very difficult to control it, to change what was said or your opinion of a person, even if it's patently untrue. I believe this is used internally in many countries to prevent any sort of challenge to the bureaucracy from rising. The trust in the UK government in of itself is at an all-time low. You can see this all around us. People are very tired of the UK government. I actually think a lot of the time people are voting now, it's not political, it's protest. And we see this in a lot of things that are happening. I don't know where it's headed, but the UK is not in a good place at the moment. I haven't seen it this destabilised and people this angry since the poll tax riots. 5th gen is very difficult to counter. The decentralised nature of it makes it difficult to even identify your opponent. It makes it very difficult to neutralise threats when you don't know where they're coming from. Most of the population have absolutely no awareness of what it is or what's going on. The subtle and persuasive nature of 5th gen can make it difficult for individuals and societies to recognise that they are under attack, which is one of the reasons I put this video up. I can't even say how obviously we are under attack by someone. Are we under attack by our own state? Are we under attack by a third party? You just don't know, but you can see the methods being used against you. As a strategy, it's not very well known outside strategic or military circles, and it is used on the population every day. Once you're aware of it, you notice it has no effect on you, much like most propaganda. The difference was, if you think back during World War II, the population was very aware of the war. It was being conducted in a foreign place, but it did touch them directly at home every day, and they knew they had a common enemy and they could work towards that. But 5th Gen moves invisibly among the population and people have no direct contact with it, so they don't fully understand what's going on. The Russians were very good at it, which is interesting to see the Ukraine conflict, because there's some real incompetence going on there. And getting engaged in a large-scale ground war was a terrible mistake on their behalf, and now they're just being bled of resources, whereas traditionally a different country might have chosen another method, using 5th Gen to achieve their objectives without firing a shot. If you want to understand how it can be used, look up a man called Yuri Bezmenov. He used to be the former KGB director, and he was in charge of finding methods to destabilise the West during the Cold War. There's a bunch of interesting videos where he's interviewed on YouTube, and it's interesting to see how they played the long game. They went after everything, including the education system, as a means to undermine the West. Sun Tzu said the best battle was the one you don't have to fight, and in the modern world this is very true, and this is at the root of 5th Gen warfare. You want to achieve objectives at minimal cost, minimal risk to lives, and ideally without anyone knowing you were even aiming for that objective. In essence, 5th Gen represents a new paradigm of warfare. It prioritises information, influence over traditional military power. Is the potential to completely reshape the way we have conflicts, and then the impact they have on societies and individuals. Like I said before, I very much doubt we will ever see a large land war ever again. Proxy wars definitely, terrorism definitely, but I think 5th Gen is how larger countries like America are going to conduct all their warfare from now on. The key element to it is subtlety. You want to create disruption, you want to achieve your objectives, and you want to execute your campaign but remain invisible as much as you can. If you push too far, if you do something too much and you're identified, that will trigger a far larger military response from your rival. Personally, I think 5th Gen is ongoing around us all the time. I think the government is fighting to control narratives. Large-scale cyber attacks are being common. You see the power grid go out and you think to yourself, was that a cyber attack? Was it just a technical issue? There seems to be a lot of this around at the moment. The spread of misinformation is absolutely rampant. You can see a lot of media and propaganda. You can actually watch the battle take place on social media. You don't know who's sponsoring what, but you do know that it's very obvious propaganda, and then other propaganda will appear to try and counteract it, so you can see the war taking place online, so to speak. Whenever you see some sort of piece of information, you've always got to carefully consider it. Steelman your argument, look at it from both sides, try and do a bit of research of it before you commit it to yourself as what you would consider truth. One of the main casualties of 5th Gen warfare is truth in of itself, and it's really hard to track that in this world at this time. Anyway, I hope I gave you something to think about. There's plenty of resources to read about 5th Gen warfare online. I'm a big fan of history, military strategy, things like that, and I just think it's very interesting to watch these things. I really enjoy seeing how things play out in the world. When the Ukraine war started, I kept a close eye on the 5th Gen aspect of it, watching the propaganda, watching the narratives play out, watching narratives be pushed from anonymous sources and then counter narratives appearing. It's very interesting when you talk to people, they'll be like pro-Ukraine war or anti-Ukraine war, and they don't actually understand the history of any of it. And you can see the actual 5th Gen warfare has taken hold of their brain, and they can't really think beyond headlines, so it's incredibly interesting to watch. Once you know it's there, once you know it's going on, it doesn't have any effect on you. You know you're being lied to. I suspect a lot of people, especially people that are that little bit turned on, have a sense of unease and know when they're being lied to anyway before they would even understand this concept. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. My next video will be something lighter, perhaps something more in the arts. Thank you so much for visiting. Please like and subscribe, and bye bye!